for drilling down around the growth indicator of belonging. You know, there are these 5 indicators, as you saw on that chart, and the reason I wanted to have you all talk about belonging with you is because it most connects to the conversation that I think you are having around faith formation. We also have talked about the indicator a little bit of listening. How many of you here are on the listening team, so I can get a read on it? Lots of you guys are still here who are part of the listening team. Awesome. So I think a valid question you have probably been asked is, if we're serious about being more effective in faith formation, why are we listening? Like, what is the point in that? It seems like a weird answer to the other question. And I just wanted to take a minute today, in our last half hour, to talk about that. The truth is that because of all the changes that you see going on in our world, and we've already kind of touched on some of that, you could, as a team of people interested in helping grow this congregation in its faith, spend all your time working on what we call technical changes that actually don't produce the results you want to produce, and feel like you have done a good job, only to be disappointed later. We see this all the time when a congregation is struggling with Sunday school. I'm going to pick on Sunday school in this little conversation. When a congregation is struggling with Sunday school, and what they want to know is what curriculum would help us, or how can we train our teachers to be different. In doing that kind of work, which there's nothing wrong with doing, those are technical changes. And what I mean by that is they are things we actually know how to do. We know how to research curriculum, and we know how to choose different ones. We know how to train leaders. We can bring in people to help us if we want to. We've got a lot of educators in this congregation. I learned last night, by the way, in leadership. That was a cool aha for me. So we could ask the people who teach all day long to help teach our Sunday school teachers. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is technical changes that I'm sad to say, in a couple of years, if you can even go that long, you're going to have the same question again. So what we're trying to do is actually something different. We're looking at making adaptive change. Change that actually we don't know how to make, that we have to experiment our way into. It's a little bit harder because I can't just say, okay, here's the book, here's what you do, it's the 5-step plan, and it will be a beautiful future. It's not that simple. In a time that is changing as much as ours is, we all have to consider everything we do as a giant research project. We are learning as we go, and we are experimenting our way into the future. I mean, there's just no other way. And it's not the first time we've done this, by the way. The church has experimented its way into the future in the past. It's just that none of us were in the room when that was happening, okay? So just want to put, I'm wondering if you can see this slide. Yeah, good. Okay, so this slide is the life cycle of a congregation. I just wanted to put this in front of you so you can take a look. Now, this is the life cycle of every congregation, not just Holy Trinity. Congregations are born on the far left side, I'm in front of you. On the far left side, there's a birth of a congregation. Congregations are planted, usually by either the synod or churchwide or another congregation. People give money, they participate, they give birth to it, then we move to infancy. This is, in Lee's language, this is in the becoming category, really probably through childhood. And there is amazing things happening. Then we move into an area which they're calling prime on this chart, which I call growing, where there's maturity in the congregation, maturity of faith. But here's what I see on this chart. When a congregation is growing, when a congregation is born, it is facing out to its community and engaged in the local neighborhood. Almost every congregation is started with the intention of reaching the people in the immediate neighborhood. As the congregation grows, the needs of the people who come are real, and they need attention. And let's face it, there's only so much we can do. And so we begin taking care of the people who come. That drives us to take care of the people who come to the extent where most of the time we end up doing this. We turn our back literally to the community because the needs of taking care of one another are so great. And I'm not suggesting that our needs don't matter. They do. We are all broken people. We come to church because we know that, and we know that we need one another. But this is part of that life cycle. There's usually a plateau time in the life cycle of a congregation where it matures. I work with a lot of congregations who can look back at that time. It's sort of the good old days stories of when we were, and we had this many kids in Sunday school, and we had whatever it is, a baseball team or a volleyball team or whatever was going on that we remember as being awesome, or we were serving maybe in a foreign country, amazing things. And then as a congregation matures, it kind of goes down the slope on the right-hand side, and ultimately we'll move into sort of a retirement and old age phase. Okay? You could put the becoming, the growing, the out of breath, and the stalled right on this curve. Can you see that? Okay. There is a window which, as you can see in this chart, is sort of hitting right past maturity before it gets into aging. There is a window there in which there is a way to enter into the life cycle of a congregation and move back to growth. But that is not a long window. What happens is a congregation will move too far into its decline of its cycle, and at that point, being able to restart something is very, very hard. Now, because I really believe all congregations can grow, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is then a redevelopment situation. It becomes a time where you're actually starting a new congregation within an existing group of people, okay, that you move to becoming again. And frankly, that's a lot harder because of the way we think. Like I started out with this morning, our way of thinking. So, Sunday school, I just want to get back to that and why we're doing this listening process. Sunday school actually is a ministry that was started by women in the church who wanted to reach out in the early 1900s to the illiterate children in their community. Do you know this? Do you know the history of Sunday school? Okay, the point of Sunday school was to teach literacy to street kids, okay, by the early church, or early 1900s. And they began this process of teaching Sunday school, and they were really effective at helping street kids. Now, in terms of teaching reading, guess what book they chose to teach them to read? Yeah, you betcha, the Bible. Bless them, it probably was the King James Version. You know, they didn't get the message like we have now. But anyway, somehow these kids, I guess, really benefited from this because they came. But that ministry began to cycle down. And in terms of reviving the Sunday school trajectory, it became a movement to help the people who were members of the church grow the faith of their own children. It happened at about the same time in like the 20s and 30s and even up to the 40s, where we were realizing that sometimes you have to call on experts to come in and help you. And so we trained our Sunday school teachers, and we began working on our own kids. Are you with me on that? So as the life cycle went on in terms of maturity now with Sunday school, where we're working on our own kids, it got to the point where in the 70s, we moved to a very expert-driven model. This is when I was growing up, and you know, you went to a soccer coach if you wanted to play soccer, you had a ballet class if you wanted to dance, you had a piano teacher to learn piano. It was no longer a time where your parents taught you and your family taught you, but you paid somebody to teach you, right? So Sunday school sort of got professionalized, if you will. We had professional Sunday school teachers. I think I'm a professional Sunday school teacher. Some of you might kind of have that claim. I feel great about some of the beautiful moments I've had in teaching kids Sunday school. But it has moved now to the decline. The question is, how do we teach the faith today? So in order to kind of work into this from adaptive changing principles, we need to ask ourselves, who are these people that we're trying to teach the faith to? Where are we starting? What do they need to know? And how can we actually do this well? Sunday school, as it turns out, is one technology for teaching the faith, and quite honestly, as we already talked about, maybe not the most effective today in a congregation this size, or frankly most congregations. What is effective in teaching the faith, Neil told you about already. Number 1, mom. Number 2, dad. Number 3, grandma. Number 4, grandpa. Number 6, pastor. On teaching the faith. And this is real research-based stuff. I have a slide presentation 30 decades that make this case, 30 decades of research. Like I could spend a whole hour showing you the research, and we can look at this later if anybody wants to. The research on faith formation in the last 30 years that makes all exactly the same point about it being mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. So knowing that, I want to ask the question, how can the congregation help mom and dad and grandma and grandpa? And Sunday school might not be the way to do that. Or maybe it is. I don't know. It's something to think about. But to make those decisions, we need to be listening. We need to be learning what's going on so that we can create new ways of doing this. At exactly the same time as we're asking these questions about Sunday school and passing on faith, we cannot miss the fact that our congregations are becoming more and more disconnected from their community. Now, I want to say, until I came to Chandler, this is why Excite Visit is so important for me as I'm coaching you guys. And we had a lengthy conversation, Darcy and Pastor Scott, about the conversation between neighborhood and community. I don't think I really understood that Chandler, you are the only ELCA congregation in Chandler. You know that? Okay, that actually really matters. If you want to think about what is your neighborhood, because in our mind map, we think about our neighborhood as being the people who can walk on their way over here, or at least are in the first, few blocks around the congregation. But if you're the only ELCA congregation, I'm going to throw out there the possibility, and you'll have to figure it out for sure, but there is a possibility that your neighborhood is the whole dang city of Chandler, and the listening team is going to have to wrestle with that and decide who you're going to listen to in order to figure that out. But this listening really matters. Because without you going in and listening to these people, you will miss the mark. You will not create a way of teaching the faith that people will care about. Not at all. So, for example, my daughter, who is raising my granddaughter, who's 3.5, said to me, Mom, the Chinese New Year thing at Faith was awesome, but none of the young families from our church went, nor can they go. And I said, why not? She said, because they don't start until 7:30 and our kids go to bed at 7:30. I'm like, wow. Can you share that with the people who are putting this on? Because you know what? The Mandarin-speaking kids go to bed at 7:30 too. It's not just the English-speaking kids. And she's like, I don't know. I guess we need to talk about it. But I didn't think anybody really cared because they didn't ask us. They didn't ask us. If somebody matters to you, you ask their opinion, right? And so that's the point of the listening, is to do the asking. When you do this listening in the community, you guys, you are not going to believe the gold you find. Now, I know you already found some jewels when you were listening in the congregation. I'm excited about that, which is why I had Neil talk about belonging, because actually one of the biggest things I can read into what I heard from listening into the congregation is people are lacking a sense of belonging. They're wanting to have a greater sense of belonging than they currently have. There's more opportunity to work on that. But, and there are some who feel connected, but there's a lot of kind of under the surface vibe that made me feel like the connections are not what people are hoping they would be. So that's a go forward. But when I'm thinking about your community, there's gold in that too. And listening to the community is not, I wish it were fast. I wish I could say that we're going to get out there, we're going to listen to the community, we're going to come back and we're going to solve the world's problems. But in fact, the best listening actually takes a couple of rounds. So you're probably not going to solve the world's problems on the listening by only one date. I call it a 3-date process. And I'm sharing this with all of you. The listening team has heard some of this already, but I want everyone to hear this so that you can support them as they head out to listen. The 3-date process includes first getting to know the people you're listening to. Second, now having a real listening time about what it is they want to share with you. And then third, beginning to think about how you plan together to problem solve. So just checking my time, yeah. When I was doing this process for the very first time, I was in charge with putting together the servant events for the ELCA Youth Gathering in New Orleans. In 2009, they asked me actually 3 years prior, in 2006, did I think I could develop servant events for 36,000 people? Wow, I'm just saying, I didn't sleep that night while I thought about it. But I had a plan by the morning, and I said, yes, I'll take it on. And the way in which we went about that is exactly like I'm coaching your listening team to do. But we spent a whole year in listening first. You're not going to do that. But we spent a whole year in listening. That's where I learned what I'm teaching you. I've really done this twice now in New Orleans. And now I'm teaching congregations to do this. So we listened for, my favorite story is Michael Hagan with the Recovery School District in New Orleans. Post-Katrina, the first time I sat down with Michael Hagan, Deputy Superintendent of the Recovery School District. This is a school district that was formed out of the crisis of Katrina, okay? And they ended up, and long story, so I'll just tell you about Michael. I met with him, and he was very polite, very nice, and I was very nice back, and we traded cards, and sure, we might be able to work together. I told him what we wanted to serve, and he had some ideas, and we listened to each other. But I knew in the back of his head, he's thinking, this lady doesn't really have 36,000 people, right? That's crazy. Or she doesn't really have people who care about us in New Orleans, is really what he's thinking. But the second time I met with Michael, he had gone to the website and checked this out, and he knew it was for real. The Lutherans were coming to New Orleans, and droves. And I had actually done some homework on him and checked some of he kept saying, you should talk to so-and-so, so-and-so. Well, I did, but I also talked to them about him. So I had the skinny on him too. Second time I met with Michael, he was talking about doing a literacy project together, and we began to think that through. The third time I went to the Recovery School District office, Michael Hagan walked up to me and he said, come on, let's go. And he grabbed my arm and he pulled me into his office. I'm like, okay, something's going on. He said, sit down. So I sat down. He said, did you read the newspaper? In New Orleans, you always read the newspaper. So yes, I had read the newspaper. He said, did you see that kid in middle school who killed that kid in high school? I said, yeah, I read that article. He said, they were in my office last week. And then he started crying. And he sat down and he told me about the violence that's going on in New Orleans. By the way, the most violent city in a certain part of New Orleans than anywhere else in the United States, in Central City, New Orleans. And Michael talked to me about the violence that was going on, and he cried his eyes out, and then he explained to me why he thinks the violence is what it is. And I mean, I was listening to him for an hour. And at one point, I said, Michael, can we pray together about this? And he said, I thought you'd never ask. And so we prayed together. This guy is a lifelong friend of mine now. He doesn't even live in New Orleans anymore. He's in Chicago now, working in the school district there. We created a relationship because you know what? I showed up and I cared. That's what we're asking you to do. To show up out in the community, to listen to people, to create relationships that matter, that create the sense of belonging Neil's talking about, but more importantly, help people understand that Holy Trinity Lutheran Church is a church that cares about this city, that this city matters to you. You're not people with your back to the city. You are people who are facing the city because you know God has given you this message. I mean, we have an amazing theology that frankly doesn't get enough noise in the Christian voice, in my opinion. And of course, I live in the Bible Belt in Texas, so we're always fighting that, the conservative voice, but the fundamental kind of believing. But I want so much from my Lutheran voice to be heard, and that's what I want for you. So as you move forward in this listening process, please keep your listening team in prayer if you're not already on the listening team, and support them as they do this listen out. It's going to be an adventure for them, and we'll have to see what they learn. You know, I don't know what that'll be yet. I've got just a few minutes to follow up if there are questions burning. I know y'all have been sitting a long time, and we're almost done, so you're probably really done. Yeah.
This slide you just showed, what's the years? What's the year time frame? I mean, from how many years are we talking from a church?
The average is about between 30 to 50 years. Okay. But it varies depending on what happens. And like I said, it can be interrupted. That's what I would hope you would do here. That's what I hope this process is all about, is you interrupting this. So that, because you're in a perfect place, you're not down to this second, third bumps. Not at all. If you were, I would tell you, to be honest. I mean, I'm not messing around here. I think this really matters, and I think you are just a step, maybe not even all the way down that first step of where you are and what you might think of as decline. I work with congregations that are way in decline. That's not you. Yeah.
Yeah, what I was going to say, Peggy, is that I think when we talk about belonging, and I heard that your presentation, it's the idea that we as a church have sometimes don't keep families together. We separate them. I mean, we have, a youth group.
Yeah.
We have a women's group. We have a men's group. We have separate Sunday school classes for 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds.
Can I say amen to that?
Yeah.
It's a problem.
I mean, we
It's
tried
a
back
problem.
in my last parish back in Pennsylvania, every month we did an intergenerational event. So we brought adults, kids, and actually we played Jeopardy. We played things like that, and adults on teams and everything else.
Oh my gosh, that's
we
so
did
much
a
fun.
Bible bowl in
That's so much fun.
the Synod, and just had youth and adults. But I think the issue is maybe we need to get back and quit. One of the things I think we do here, and I've only been here a year, so I'm trying to be careful, but I think when you separate kids out of worship because you have Sunday school at the same time that you have worship, then those kids don't come.
So I'm sticking my neck out on this one, okay? I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think your worship times are not helping you. The fact that you have worship and learning concurrently reduces a whole lot of opportunity that's not happening. And I know people are always afraid to make these kinds of changes, but I want to tell you, Pastor Kerry, who is the pastor called to my congregation, who's been there now 4 years and has got us doing Mandarin ministry, he's changed the worship times 4 times, and people have not died over it. It's true. The first time he changed it was the wrong way. It was a disaster. And so they had to then think, okay, well, we don't want to go back, but we don't want this. Okay, what are we going to do? So then we went to the second revision, and then they decided they were going to add a Sunday evening service. And here's why. Because that congregation, right under their noses without anyone paying attention, has a healing ministry happening. They have something like 10 AA groups meeting during the week at that church that never gets invited into worship. Why wouldn't we have a worship for people in recovery? And so Pastor Kerry has formed that, and now on Sunday nights, not happening in sanctuary, by the way, because it's small and it's happening in a room about this size, they have a healing worship that's happening, and it's very relational, it's storytelling, it's low church, candles, beautiful experience. Because they're trying to move from just landlording these organizations to having a relationship with them that matters. So yeah, that's exactly right. We cannot keep separating people into separate categories, and we have to make changes, even if it means changing our worship time. You guys, I hope you get some courage out of this conversation to take some risks. Remember my spectrum, playing it safe, innovating and taking chances, having courage. I hope you get some courage. It's your congregation. I mean, let's take a chance here on helping this congregation get set up to change that downward spiral. Again, Sunday school is the canary in the mine shaft. I see it. It's the first place we see the problem. That's really all around us. And so this is really important. Any other questions? You have been absolutely fantastic to work with this morning, and I know it's hard. I'm so glad you're standing up. I would have to be if I were here. It's very hard to sit all morning on a Saturday and do this. I'm so glad that you came. I hope this was worth your time.